And now with all the latest stories of the day, it's the ITV Lunchtime News.
The number of pupils getting top grades in their GCSEs hits an all-time high.
You passed all of them.
Hundreds of thousands got their results today after exams were cancelled for a second year in a row and grades were given by teachers instead.
I feel like I worked really hard for my grades and I got them, so I'm really, really happy.
That's so good.
I've outperformed myself.
Also this lunchtime, no one is above the law. The head of the Met Police on allegations facing Prince Andrew. How isolation rules for those in England who are double jabbed are changing from next week, and they won bronze at the Olympics. So how did Team GB's gymnast twins do in their GCSEs?
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Lucrezia Millarini.
Good afternoon. For a long stretch of their young lives, their future and plans have been so very uncertain. But today, GCSE students in England, Wales and Northern Ireland received their results and finally have some clarity on their futures. Well, many teenagers are celebrating with almost a third of the grades awarded being the highest mark possible. But Labour say this year's results also exposes a growing divide between state and private schools. Here's our political reporter Shihab Khan on the bumper grades.
Some good news for these students this morning after what has been a turbulent couple of years.
I did it, it's fine!
Those who studied for their GCSEs across England, Wales and Northern Ireland today opened their envelopes to get results for the qualifications they've worked on throughout the pandemic.
All right, I'm happy now. I'm not worried now. Okay, yeah.
Crazy. It's like, it doesn't feel real. It's like, it's just, I really wasn't expecting it.
I was so nervous. We were texting each other and we were like, I don't know if I'm going to get this, I don't know if I'm going to get that, but we got it.
I feel like I worked really hard for my grades and I got them, so I'm really, really happy.
Relief too from teachers who, because of COVID, had to submit grades for their students based on previous work instead of them sitting exams.
We have lots of students who are smiling, who are really happy. They've got everything they need, most importantly, to go on to the next stage.
COVID has meant things are far from normal. Instead of exams, teachers submitted grades using evidence such as tests, coursework and mock exams. This year, almost 29% of pupils achieved the top grades in their GCSEs this year. That's up from just over 26% of pupils last year. Girls continue to lead boys, with a third of girls getting the highest grades, compared to just under a quarter of boys. There was a gap too between students at private and state schools. Over 61% of those at private schools got top marks, compared to just over 26% at state schools. That last figure is something that the Labour leader isn't happy about.
For Gavin Williamson and the government, on the question of, or on the issue of tackling inequality, they just got a U, and I think that's completely unacceptable. And when inequality goes up in education, then it's pretty astonishing that the Education Secretary is still in post. And if he won't resign, the Prime Minister should get rid of him.
Government ministers accept that the inequality in the results was an issue, and they argue going back to exams is the best way forward.
Now, we've been very clear that we think exams are the fairest system of assessing pupils' attainment. We've already announced that next year, 2022, exams will return, though we are making adjustments to those exams to reflect the fact that the students taking them will have suffered quite a bit of disruption this year.
A day of celebration and relief for many, but one thing that is certain, that after such a tough period, all these students deserve a bit of a break.
So she had lots of pupils celebrating there, but what today's GCSE results point to as well is this growing inequality gap.
Yeah, absolutely. You heard it mentioned there in that report about the difference between state schools and private schools. There's also been a widening between those who are on free school meals and those who aren't. Now, compared to 2019, there was a widening of grades by about 1/10 of a grade. That's about 10% of a grade, which is quite significant. Now, the exams watchdog says that is probably because of the impact of COVID. Now, I remember speaking to a head teacher about this not long ago, talking about how difficult it is for some students to study at home if they don't have the right equipment, if they're not in a place where they can study quietly, and these things have all meant that there has been a widening of the results, especially during this difficult period where school and teaching has been very different. And what we know is the government accepts this as a significant issue, and they say they are working on it, and it's something they want to iron out for the future.
All right, Shihab, thank you. Next, the country's most senior police officer has warned no one is above the law. As she revealed, detectives will review allegations against the Duke of York. Metropolitan Police Commissioner Cressida Dick revealed she'd asked her team to have another look at the material. I'm joined by our correspondent Geraint Vincent. Geraint, talk us through what was said in relation to this inquiry.
Well, the police chief was questioned on LBC radio this morning about what action the Met is taking in the light of new legal action that's taking place in the United States. Virginia Giuffre has filed a civil suit in New York. She is suing the Queen's second son because she claims he sexually assaulted her when she was 17 years old. She says she was trafficked by the convicted paedophile and a former friend of the Prince, Jeffrey Epstein, and that one of the sexual assaults happened the night that this photograph was taken at the London home of Epstein's friend, Ghislaine Maxwell. Prince Andrew vehemently denies these allegations, says he can't remember even meeting this woman. But this is what Cressida Dick had to say this morning about the case that she's bringing.
It's been reviewed twice before. We work closely with the CPS. We are, of course, open to working with authorities from overseas. We will give them every assistance if they want to, if they ask us for anything within the law, obviously.
And as a result of New York.
And as a result of what's going on, I've asked my team to have another look at the material.
And Cressida Dick also made clear that there is no current investigation. She said that she reviewed the allegations made against Epstein in the past, and after advice from the CPS decided not to open an inquiry. Prince Andrew was photographed earlier this week arriving at Balmoral, where he's joined the Queen. A spokesman for the Prince has said that they had no comment to make on the civil action that Miss Giuffre is bringing.
All right, Geraint, thank you. The NHS in England has recorded the highest ever number of people waiting for hospital treatment. Almost 5.5 million people needed routine treatment, which is the highest since records began in 2007. Well, the Health Service says it's trying its best to deal with the growing backlog, but there are warnings the total waiting list could hit 14 million next year. With the story, here's Rebecca Barry.
At Coventry Hospital, the perpetual flow of patients seems endless. It's the same across much of the NHS in England, where the backlog fuelled by the pandemic means the number of people waiting for routine treatment is at a record high.
We are quite short-staffed today, but we'll just do as best as we can do.
NHS staff have managed to reduce the length of waiting times, but only by stretching themselves to the limit.
We have some great staff, but of course they've worked really hard over the last 18 months, and we're asking them to do even more now. They're doing what we call normal work during evenings and weekends. But of course staff are also tired, so we have to recognise the demands on their time.
Latest figures from NHS England show 5.45 million people were waiting to start non-emergency treatment in June. That's the highest number since records began in 2007. But the number of patients waiting longer than the target of 18 weeks fell by almost 25,000.
If I didn't have that operation in the next week, probably, then it could have been life-threatening for me.
Joanna's had open heart surgery once. Now the engineering student and karate champion needs it again. But it's already been delayed 2 months with no date set.
From a mental perspective, it's very frustrating because you're just waiting for the inevitable. You know that you need that operation, and that frustration does build up. And then from a physical perspective as well, I want to get back into running. I want to get back into my fitness, and not knowing actually when or even if I'll be able to do certain things.
The Health Secretary, visiting a coronavirus testing lab today, insists the government is investing in the health service.
We are providing the NHS with the resources that it needs. Already this year, there's an extra £29 billion gone into the NHS and social care, and we will certainly be looking again at what more we need to do.
But experts warn up to 14 million people could be waiting for care by the autumn next year. NHS bosses say they need more money for more trained staff to get through it. Rebecca Barry, ITV News.
The number of people told to self-isolate by the NHS COVID app continues to fall. Nearly 320,000 alerts were sent last week, which is 20% down on the week before. But things could look very different from next week as isolation rules are relaxed in England. Let's take a look at the changes coming into force from next Monday. Fully vaccinated adults will no longer have to isolate if they come into contact with someone who has COVID. Instead of isolating, you'll be advised to get a PCR test, though this is not a legal requirement. And you'll be advised to limit social contact, especially with vulnerable people. However, if you test positive, it is still a legal requirement to isolate. Well, the same rules also apply to children, whether they are vaccinated or not. Let's talk through all of that now. I'm very pleased to say that I'm joined by Professor Linda Boud. Thanks so much for joining us this lunchtime. Let's look at this rule change that comes into effect on Monday. What impact do you think this will have so far? When we've seen cases falling, haven't we? So do you think this will have an impact on that, first of all?
It may have a small impact, not a big one. I think if we look back, Lucrezia, to I think it was July 21st to 25th, 6% of the population of England self-isolating because they'd been a close contact. Those are really big numbers. As you say, it's declined. But this is a change that's already been introduced in Wales on the 7th of August and up here in Scotland on the 9th of August. We've not seen any immediate impact. It's also a strategy being adopted internationally, for example, in the USA. And it just underlines as we move through this pandemic, if people have received both doses of the vaccine 14 days later, it's proportionate to not have exactly the same approach. What I would say to people who are within that category, who still are close contacts, is that they really should get that test, even if it's voluntary, and they should remain cautious, for example, not having as many interactions and wearing face coverings. I think that will reduce any risks.
You say, you advise people to still get that PCR test, but the problem is, once again, this is not a legal requirement. And do you think that will cause some confusion if people think, well, if I don't have to go and get it, why should I go and get it, especially if I am double vaccinated?
I think it will, and this is the problem always with these voluntary approaches. We would wish everything to be voluntary, but mandating things does make that advice much, much clearer and required. So I think we are trusting at this stage in the pandemic, there's much more of an emphasis on people's individual responsibility. That's what government is asking for in a whole range of ways, not just this one. But I think if you talk to people, they recognise that if they have been alerted that they're a close contact, that there's a risk, and this is something they can do, rule themselves out. People often try immediately to take a lateral flow at home, which of course is an option. But I think the PCR will really show more reliably. And there's effort involved going to a testing centre or ordering one, etc. But it's important that people do that if they can.
And finally, we know that cases are dropping and we have very good percentages of people who are fully vaccinated now. But we are hearing from some corners that a warning that come this autumn, we will see a rise in cases again.
That's right. Actually, we are starting to see a tiny uptick. There was a very small percentage rise, about 6.5% in cases over the last 7 days. I think we're beginning to see the impact of July the 19th and then further easing across the UK. But you're right. Looking ahead, I'm not worried about the next few weeks. I'm more worried about what will happen in the autumn, universities and schools back in, weather getting colder, etc. We have to recognise it's still going to be a bumpy road. But the key thing is the vaccines are working. If we can get even more of those younger groups coming forward, and of course there's discussion of boosters, that will hopefully help us get through the winter. And final point, of course, and allow the NHS to get on with that huge backlog that you've just been covering in the programme.
Indeed. Professor Linda Boud, thank you once again for joining us this lunchtime. Thank you. In today's other stories, extreme weather continues to have a devastating impact around the world. In Turkey, severe floods and mudslides have left at least 5 people dead in the north of the country, while another person is missing. Meanwhile, in India, 500,000 people have been affected by flooding in the north of the country in the state of Uttar Pradesh. Experts say the heavier than usual rainfall is down to climate change. And what's thought to be Europe's highest ever temperature was recorded on the Italian island of Sicily, where the mercury hit 48.8 degrees Celsius. Italy continues to battle with wildfires, which have killed 4 people in the south of the country. Now, the UK's economy is recovering after the impact of the pandemic and lockdowns. That's according to new figures released by the Office for National Statistics. Between April and June, the economy grew by nearly 5%. The increase linked to bars, restaurants and hotels reopening as lockdown restrictions eased. However, the economy overall is just over 2% smaller than it was before COVID. And the furlough scheme is due to come to an end in September, something the Chancellor claims will not leave workers in the lurch.
Yeah, the furlough scheme is due to end, but we're not done supporting people. I've always said that I can't promise to save every single person's job. What we can do is provide people with new hope, new opportunity through initiatives like the Kickstart scheme for young people, the Lifetime Skills Guarantee, apprenticeship incentives. So there's lots we're doing to help people in work.
Let's talk now to finance expert Louise Cooper. Louise, thanks so much for joining us this lunchtime. Let's just start there with what Rishi Sunak was talking about, the furlough. A lot of people, he's saying it's going to be fine, but a lot of people who are on furlough will be watching and worried about it coming to an end next month.
So one of the reasons the economy has rebounded so strongly is consumer spending. For those lucky enough to have kept their jobs and stayed in their jobs, they've amassed savings. So now finally we can get out of our houses and spend it. We have this sort of bit of a mini consumer boom going on. How long that lasts will be dependent on a few things. Firstly, as you said, furlough comes to an end in October. Looked at latest figures from the House of Commons report, suggesting there's still about 3 million people on furlough, down from more like 8-9 million. So clearly there are still significant numbers on furlough, but the scheme has done a brilliant job protecting those and keeping them in employment. So that's the first thing that probably may cause consumer spending and the economy to start to slow down. The second thing that could cause it to slow down is people just spending all their lockdown cash. They've consumed, they've saved a load of money, and then they spend it, there's nothing left. And then the third thing could be, of course, house prices. House prices have done very, very well because of the stamp duty holiday. And again, that may well slow down a bit as the stamp duty holiday ends and as maybe you see a little bit of an uptick on unemployment. So there's a strong rebound, absolutely as expected as the economy opens. The question is how long it lasts, how long consumers continue to be buoyant.
Yeah, and that is a central question, isn't it, Louise? Because this is positive news that the economy is growing overall, but it is still just over 2% lower than it was pre-pandemic. And also, what does it mean to people? Take it in the wider context when we take into account inflation. Cost of living is predicted to rise. Fuel prices, we know they're going up. Salaries, though, are not.
So this is the great debate, right? And the Bank of England and most other central banks around the world think the rise of inflation, and there are forecasts that UK price rises could get to something like 4% later this year, 5%, which, can be quite painful if you're not getting wage increases. So the big debate at the moment is this just a temporary blip, a temporary uptick in inflation? Because we've got shortages, because 3 million people on furlough, so they can't get, other jobs. And we've got a strong rebound and there's a bit of a staff shortage problem. So is this just a temporary blip to inflation, or is it something a little more? And I'm afraid we're not going to know that for some time. But a 4% in inflation, 4 to 5% inflation by the end of the year, if you're not getting a pay rise, then you will feel that in your pocket.
Yep, certainly will. Louise Cooper, thank you very much for talking to us this lunchtime. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Now, how about this? When Olympic sprinter Hansel Parchment caught the wrong bus to his race in Tokyo, he thought his Olympic dream was over. But thanks to the kindness of a stranger who gave him money for a taxi, the Jamaican not only made the race, but he won gold. Well, on this video on social media, he tracked that kind stranger down, not only to say thank you, but, of course, to pay her back. And finally, it's been a summer of success for the Gadarova twins. Not only have they just arrived back from Tokyo with bronze medals, but today they also received distinctions in their GCSEs. Well, gymnasts Jessica and Jennifer picked up their results along with their classmates at Aylesbury Vale Academy in Buckinghamshire. Sangeeta Kandola has their story.
The Gadarova girls are still beaming with pride.
Tremendous power.
From bringing home bronze from Tokyo in the gymnastics to GCSE glory today. This morning, dressed in their finest Team GB attire, medals and all, they reaped more rewards.
I got a level 2 distinction star in business, and we both got a level 2 distinction star in health and fitness, so we're very pleased. We just wanted the pass and that's all we got, so we're happy just to move on and be happy.
The twins say balancing floor work and homework hasn't been easy, but they've had a lot of school support.
It was very difficult because we tried to fit as much training, but then also we needed to study to get our GCSE results, so it was quite hard, but I think with the support of our school and everyone, it would have been possible. We're so grateful.
But mostly the girls say they relied on each other.
With school, if I don't understand something, she'll help me, or we'll both work together to figure it out. But also with training as well, if I'm having a tough day, she'll be there for me and we'll just work through it together.
The 16-year-old gymnasts say they've got the glitter ball in their sights and may follow in the footsteps of fellow Olympic gymnast Louis Smith.
During our floor routine, we love to perform and express and dance, so definitely Strictly's on our mind.
For now, the girls are staying on at school and training starts next week for the next set of competitions and hopes of more podium success for the siblings. Sangeeta Kandola, ITV News.
Well done to them, and a reminder of our main story this lunchtime. Teenagers across England, Wales and Northern Ireland have received another set of record GCSE results, or record set. It's the second year teachers have submitted grades after exams were disrupted because of the pandemic. Many pupils are celebrating with almost a third of entries awarded the top grades possible. And that's it. Charlene's back at 6:30, but from all the team here, bye-bye.